It's time for Myth of the Week.
All right, so this was a really awesome myth this week. I asked if common trip was required for multi-wire branch circuits, and the answer is no. Common disconnect. This is a really shoddy install. I did it in about 10 seconds, just messing around on the job site. But I just wanted to show how I was actually creating a breaker handle, and they call these commonly handle ties. Is this identified to be a handle tie? I would say probably yes. But the only thing that this needs to provide per code is that all three of these shared circuits that share the neutral, these ungrounded conductors that share the grounded conductor shared with these ungrounded conductors, they're all disconnected simultaneously. Nothing in the code says they have to trip at a common rate. And so this is a common misconception. We deal with this all the time. I've actually heard people say that this is like the worst practice ever and da 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 da. But for all intents and purposes, per the code language, this would comply for multiple code references that as long as all three of those circuits are simultaneously de-energized, then it's code compliant. Is it common trip? No. A handle tie does not make this a common trip.
No.
That is very controversial, and that is the whole reason for this myth. And I think I'm just going to let James take it from here.
All right. Well, when I started looking at this, the first thing you need to look at, we actually in another myth sort of touched base on this, and we were looking at 210.4b as it dealt with the disconnecting means for multi-wire branch circuits. And what it tells you here is that each multi-wire branch circuit shall be provided with a means that will simultaneously disconnect. That's the key word, disconnect all ungrounded conductors at the point where the branch circuit originates. Okay.
Yep.
That is the main part of that, simultaneously disconnect. And then it tells you when you're using those single pole type circuit breakers as the disconnecting means, the informational note's going to refer you over to 240.15b. And when you go over and pick up B, you're actually going to pick up B1 that deals with multi-wire branch circuits. And it tells you that those individual single post circuit breakers, then it'll say with identified handle ties shall be permitted as a protection for each ungrounded conductor of multi-wire branch circuits that serve only single phase line to neutral loads. Okay.
Oh, dude, I got to interrupt you, man. Freaking Mike just said a DeWalt is a man's tool.
Oh, God.
Hey, we'll save that for the tour review. All right, brother?
Yeah. All right. Now, this is what you want to look at. And I'm just telling you how this is going to work. Okay. When you go look at identified as it's applied to equipment, it says recognized. Now, that's important because it just tells you it's recognizable as suitable for the specific purpose, function, use, environment, application, and so forth as described in a particular code requirement. Okay.
Right.
Then when you go look at some examples here in the informational note to determine the suitability of the equipment or for a specific purpose, environment, or application, include investigations by a qualified testing laboratory, which that specifically deals with listing and labeling of equipment, and the inspection agency or other organizations concerned with product evaluation. Okay.
Yeah, and one thing we did have too, I just want to point out, James, I hope I'm not interrupting you, but I believe it was 110.3b actually added listed, labeled, or identified as one of the code changes for 2023.
It did. And that's why I'm bringing up the informational note and everything here, because then what's going to happen after that, because it says an inspection agency or other organization concerned with product evaluation, Then you're going to look at the definition of approved. And of course, that's acceptable to who? The AHJ.
HJ.
Okay. And then when you go look at the AHJ, it tells you an organization, office, or individual responsible for enforcing the requirements of a code or standard or for approving equipment, materials, or installation or procedure. Okay.
Yep.
So they could take and look at that and see where you took that copper, put it through there, and folded it up on both ends. And somebody's going to have to literally go in there and remove that like they would a handle tie, and that they placed on top of them. And they may say, you know what, that's good enough. It'd be
Yeah,
perfectly fine if they look at it that way. Okay.
I agree.
So that's why I say you need to look at what the code says here. Now I'm going to take it a step further here, because when you go over here, you're going to look at 110.2, and this is where you're going to pick up approval. And it says the conductor.
I think really this is where I got you up till early morning hours.
Well, it was other things I was getting, but I knew what I wanted to put in this one. So it says the conductors and equipment required or permitted by this code shall be acceptable only if approved. And if we went back to approved, it said is it acceptable by who? The authority having jurisdiction. There you go. Then there's an informational note, and I would say here we can look at 110.3 if we want to, but I didn't put it in here because you already see in the informational note, it says see definitions of approved, identified, labeled, and listed, which we did. Okay.
Yep.
But when you look at 90.7, that's the examination of equipment for safety. Okay. Now, when you go over and look at that, it says for specific items of equipment and materials referred to in this code, examinations for safety made under standard conditions provide a basis for approval once again, where the record is made generally available through promulgation by organizations properly equipped and qualified for experimental testing, inspection of the run of goods at factories, the service value determination through field inspections. This avoids the necessity for repetition of examinations by different examiners, frequently with inadequate facilities for such work, and the confusion that will result from conflicting reports and suitability of devices and materials examined for a given purpose. So when I look at this, and I look down at the informational notes that go with the examination of equipment, where does it take me to? 110.3, Article 100 for definitions of listed and reconditioned, and then there's an Annex A for a list of product safety standards. Okay?
Well, so this is a good one that David brings up, and this is where we get into a lot of this controversy, because what he's saying is that copper piece of wire is probably the best handle tie for like a common disconnect application, but it's not listed, and nothing really says it has to be listed as long as it's identified as a handle tie.
It does not. And that's what I want to go back to here. Now that we've looked at that, let's look right here. Right there in 240.15b1, it doesn't say anything about the handle ties being listed. It says identified.
Yep, I agree.
That's the end of discussion. So people will come in and say that's got to be listed as a handle tie. No, it doesn't. And if it does, you show me where in the code where it says that, because I can't find it. And I've been doing it a long time.
Yeah, and this is kind of, in my opinion, a little bit of a gray area, because it has to be identified as a handle tie. So if you go take like a 632 screw and you put a nut on it and everything, to me, I can identify that as a 632 with a nut on it. Could I identify that piece of wire as a number 12, a number 14, number 16, number 18, whatever? No, I couldn't. I mean, I could probably tell you you're not going to get a number 10 through those holes. A number 10 is probably not going to fit. But, that's the thing, is that easily identifiable, and I think that's where the gray area comes in.
Well, and identified, as we were looking at the definition, And I looked at that definition here. When I looked at identified, it's telling you recognizable as suitable for the specific purpose, function, use, environment, application, and so forth.
Yeah. And I agree. Number 12 works all day.
Yeah, but I also take it a step further because we used to do that all the time back in the 80s, 90s. I mean, that was nothing uncommon. And I would even suggest at that point, why did they even take and put those little holes in the handles in the first place? That's what they were using it for.
No, I'm just kidding.
But when you go and look at that, that was something that was a common practice, and it worked. And
yeah,
I would just suggest at that point, why would you think they would put the little hose in those handles there? You tell me another reason it's there. I always believed it was there because people were putting copper through there, making it a handle tie.
Oh man, David's calling me out, man. Right on, David. I'm not being specific.
Solid.
Yeah, solid. But see, that's the thing too. I mean, you could think like, let's just go on the nature of like stranded. Is stranded suitable? Like, it doesn't have to be common trip. You could guarantee. You could take a tie wrap. You could take a zip tie and put it through there, and I could guarantee you put a zip tie through there, all three of those are going to shut off together. That's code compliant.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further. Is you take a zip tie, you take solid copper, you take and put a handle tie that just fits over it. All three of those will have to be physically removed. What does it identify as? Yeah. All right. I think that's a wrap on that. I can't think of anything else that I.
Yeah, and David's right. You could use a nail. I don't see why a nail wouldn't. You could use anything because basically that was my whole point with this myth of the week. Myth is busted. Does not have to be common trip.